The South Atlantic in early winter is broad and sparsely trafficked. Long swells move steadily across open water, driven by winds that shift without warning. The surface can appear calm for hours at a time, then change quickly as weather systems pass. There are few visual markers. Distance is measured by time underway rather than by reference to land. During the Second World War, merchant vessels crossed this ocean along dispersed routes. Radio silence was common. Ships traveled alone when convoys were unavailable, relying on timing and chance to avoid detection. The sea did not distinguish between military and civilian traffic. It carried everything without preference. At night, the ocean absorbs light. Even a large ship leaves little trace beyond its wake. Engine noise fades quickly into wind and water. From the deck, the horizon disappears. Sky and sea merge into a continuous field of darkness. Navigation depends on instruments and routine rather than sight. The Atlantic offers no indication of scale to those upon it. Days pass with little visible change. The motion of the ship becomes constant, then unremarkable. Work continues. Watches change. Meals are taken. The passage is treated as a process rather than an event. In 1942, much of this ocean lay beyond immediate reach of rescue. Distances between land masses were measured in weeks. Air patrols were limited. A ship's absence could go unnoticed for days. The environment imposed delay as a condition, not an exception. The water temperature in this region varies with latitude and current. Survival time after immersion is unpredictable. Wind and sun influence exposure more than charts can predict. The sea does not announce its tolerance. At this stage, there is no disruption. The Atlantic remains open and neutral. Movement continues across its surface without interruption. What follows is not visible from the horizon or written into the water ahead. Poon was born in 1918 on Hainan Island, off the southern coast of China. His early life was shaped by poverty and political instability. Work opportunities were limited, and like many young men from coastal regions, he looked outward toward the sea as a source of employment rather than adventure. As a teenager, Poon went to sea aboard merchant vessels operating between China and Southeast Asia. The work was demanding but steady. He learned basic seamanship, galley duties, and shipboard routine. These skills were practical rather than specialized. He was not trained for navigation or command. His position, like that of many non-European sailors at the time, was confined to lower-ranking roles. When the Second World War expanded into Asia, maritime employment became more dangerous and more constrained. Chinese sailors faced discrimination aboard Western ships, often receiving lower pay and fewer protections. Despite this, the war increased demand for crew willing to sail long routes through hostile waters. In 1941, Poon joined the British Merchant Navy. His assignment was aboard the SS Benlamond, a cargo vessel operating independently in the Atlantic. He was hired as a second steward, responsible for cleaning officers' quarters and assisting with service duties. The role placed him below deck for much of the voyage, removed from navigation and decision-making. The ship's route in late 1942 took it from Cape Town toward Paramaribo in Dutch Guyana. It carried general cargo and no armament capable of defending against submarines. Like many merchant ships of the period, it traveled alone, without escort. Poon did not expect combat. He had previously survived submarine scares and understood the general risk, but there was no sense of imminent danger. His expectation was limited and practical. Complete the voyage, earn wages, and return to port. There was no specialized survival training provided to the crew. Lifeboats and rafts were carried as required by regulation, but their use was theoretical. Emergency drills were minimal. The assumption was that attack, if it came, would allow time for evacuation or rescue. At this point, Poon's identity aboard the ship was defined by routine and hierarchy. He was a worker among many, anonymous within a system shaped by war and distance. His relationship to the ocean was professional rather than personal. It was a place of passage, not endurance. That assumption would not survive the voyage. On the night of November 23, 1942, the SS Benlamond moved through the South Atlantic without escort. Weather conditions were stable. Visibility was limited but adequate for routine navigation. There were no warning signals, no alarms, and no indication that another vessel was nearby. The German submarine U-172 detected the ship and maneuvered into position without being seen. Merchant vessels traveling alone were vulnerable targets. The Benlamond carried no defensive armament capable of altering the outcome. A single torpedo struck the ship without warning. The explosion tore through the hull and ignited cargo below deck. The impact was immediate and decisive. There was no prolonged engagement, no opportunity to transmit a distress signal. Electrical systems failed almost at once. The ship began to sink rapidly. Crew members were thrown from their stations. Some were trapped below deck. Others were killed instantly by the explosion. Fire spread through interior spaces as seawater rushed in. Poon was in his quarters when the torpedo struck. He was thrown into the water during the initial chaos, either by the blast or by the ship's rapid listing. He did not recall entering the sea deliberately. When he surfaced, the ship was already disappearing. Within minutes, the Benlamond was gone. No lifeboats were launched. No organized evacuation occurred. The sea closed over the wreckage, leaving debris scattered across the surface. Poon was alone in the water. No other survivors were visible. Oil and fragments floated nearby. The night was quiet again, interrupted only by small waves and the sound of burning debris. After several hours in the water, Poon located a life raft drifting nearby. It was a Carly float, circular in shape, designed to remain buoyant even when damaged. He climbed aboard with difficulty, exhausted and cold. The raft contained limited supplies, a small quantity of fresh water, biscuits, flares, a flashlight, and basic tools. It was intended for short-term survival, not extended isolation. By dawn, the wreckage had dispersed. There were no ships on the horizon. No aircraft passed overhead. The raft drifted freely, carried by wind and current. At this point, survival narrowed to a single person on a small platform in open ocean. There was no known search underway, no fixed position. The disappearance of the ship had not been observed. The Atlantic resumed its movement, unchanged by the loss. The ship, its crew, and its route were no longer part of the surface world. What remained was one raft, drifting without direction, and a man with no external reference except the water around him. The life raft was small, circular, and exposed. Its floor sat just above the waterline. There was no canopy, no fixed shelter from sun or rain. Movement was restricted to a few steps in any direction. The raft's stability depended on balance rather than structure, and sudden shifts could overturn it if handled poorly. The supplies on board were limited and intended for short-term use. Fresh water was rationed immediately. Biscuits were broken into small portions. Flares and signaling equipment were conserved, reserved for moments when a ship or aircraft might appear close enough to respond. There was no guarantee that such a moment would come. From the first days, routine became necessary. Poon organized his time around tasks rather than hours. He checked the raft for leaks, tightened ropes, and secured loose items to prevent loss during rough seas. Exposure to sun was managed by alternating posture and using clothing to cover skin where possible. Fishing became the primary source of food. The raft carried no fishing gear beyond basic line, but improvised hooks were fashioned from wire and nails found among the supplies. Fish were caught by trailing lines from the raft. They were eaten raw. Waste was minimized. Bones and skin were consumed when possible. Seabirds became another source of food. Birds occasionally landed on the raft, attracted by rest or by fish remains. They were caught by hand. Their meat provided protein. Their blood supplemented fluid intake. Feathers were used to improve insulation and padding on the raft's surface. Rainwater collection was critical. When storms passed overhead, containers were positioned to capture runoff. During dry periods, water intake was reduced to the minimum required to maintain function. Thirst was constant. Discipline governed consumption. Drinking too quickly risked depleting reserves beyond replacement. The raft drifted steadily westward, though this was not immediately apparent. There was no navigation equipment capable of providing precise location. Direction was inferred from sun position and prevailing winds. Attempts to paddle were limited and largely ineffective against open ocean currents. Maintenance occupied much of the day. Salt water degraded materials quickly. Rope fibers weakened. Metal corroded. Small repairs prevented larger failures. Loss of the raft's integrity would have been fatal. Every object on board was treated as irreplaceable. Sleep was irregular. The raft moved continuously, rocking and shifting. At night, temperature dropped. Exposure increased. Rest came in short intervals. The body adapted to fatigue rather than recovering from it. Dreams and waking thought blended during periods of exhaustion. Storms altered conditions without warning. Waves washed over the raft, soaking supplies and threatening stability. During these periods, movement was minimized. The raft was allowed to ride with the sea rather than resist it. Afterward, damage was assessed and addressed slowly. Mental regulation became part of survival. Without external reference, time lost structure. Poon marked days by habit rather than calendar. He avoided dwelling on distance or probability. Effort was directed toward immediate needs: food, water, maintenance. Occasionally, ships appeared on the horizon. Signals were attempted when possible. In some cases, vessels passed without seeing the raft. In others, signals were noticed, but not acted upon, possibly due to wartime caution or distance. Each missed opportunity reinforced restraint. Flares were too few to waste. The raft continued drifting. Sun and salt altered skin. Weight decreased steadily. Muscle mass diminished. Despite this, daily tasks were maintained. Survival did not depend on strength, but on consistency applied within narrow limits. Weeks passed without interruption. The ocean's surface changed in color and temperature as latitude shifted. Fish species varied. Birds appeared less frequently, then returned. These changes were noted, but not interpreted as progress. The raft remained intact. Food continued to be obtained intermittently. Water was collected when rain allowed. Life persisted on a platform never designed to support it for long. Survival became procedural rather than hopeful. Each day followed the last without anticipation of resolution. The Atlantic did not respond to effort or endurance. It carried the raft steadily onward, indifferent to how long it had been afloat or how long it might continue. As the weeks extended into months, the effects of isolation and exposure accumulated. Weight loss became pronounced. Muscle strength declined. Movements slowed and required more effort. Skin hardened and cracked under constant sun and salt. Small injuries healed slowly, if at all. Nutrition remained irregular. Fish were not caught every day. Seabirds appeared unpredictably. During periods without success, hunger was managed rather than relieved. Calorie intake fluctuated well below what the body required. Energy conservation became more deliberate. Movement was reduced to essential tasks. Storms intensified risk. Waves broke over the raft, flooding the surface and washing loose items toward the edge. Supplies had to be secured repeatedly. During heavy seas, Poon lay flat to reduce the chance of being thrown overboard. After storms passed, damage was assessed methodically. Losses were accepted without reaction. Heat and thirst dominated daily experience. Rain was inconsistent. During dry stretches, water intake was reduced further. Concentration narrowed. Physical weakness increased. Despite this, seawater was avoided. Prior experience and instruction had reinforced the danger. Discipline governed choice even when discomfort became severe. Psychological strain emerged gradually. Isolation removed external reference. There was no confirmation of movement or progress. Time lost conventional meaning. Days blended together, marked only by hunger, light, and sleep. Hallucinations were later reported. Sounds, shapes, and imagined vessels. But these did not consistently alter behavior. Rescue attempts failed repeatedly. On at least 2 occasions, ships were sighted close enough to signal. Flares were used. In one instance, a vessel altered course briefly, then continued on. The reasons were never confirmed. Wartime caution, distance, or misinterpretation may have played a role. Each failure reduced the remaining signaling capacity. The raft drifted across shipping lanes without being seen. Currents carried it toward the equatorial Atlantic, then westward. This movement was inferred only after rescue. At the time, direction remained uncertain. Despite decline, routine held. Fishing lines were checked daily. Water was collected when rain allowed. Repairs continued. The raft's condition remained functional. Survival depended on preventing sudden failure rather than restoring strength. Night remained the most difficult period. Temperature dropped. Fatigue increased. Sleep came in fragments. At times, exhaustion overrode awareness, increasing risk of slipping or rolling into the water. These moments passed without incident, but the margin remained narrow. Endurance was sustained not by optimism, but by habit. Tasks were repeated because they were necessary, not because they promised outcome. The raft remained afloat. The body functioned at reduced capacity. Life continued within strict limits. By the 4th month, survival had extended far beyond the raft's intended use. Supplies had been consumed or replaced by improvised means. The environment had not softened. It had simply not yet imposed a final constraint. The Atlantic carried the raft onward, unchanged by the duration of its burden. Survival persisted not because conditions improved, but because they did not yet exceed what could be endured. In early April 1943, after more than 4 months adrift, the character of the water began to change. The color shifted from deep blue to greener tones. Floating vegetation appeared intermittently. Birds became more frequent. These signs suggested proximity to land, though distance remained uncertain. The raft continued to drift westward under the influence of prevailing currents. There was no controlled approach. Movement remained passive. Poon did not attempt to paddle toward shore. His strength was limited, and the risk of capsizing outweighed any potential gain. Survival continued to depend on restraint. On April 5, a small fishing vessel approached the raft off the coast of South America. The fishermen were Brazilian. Their boat moved cautiously at first, uncertain of what they were seeing. The raft was low in the water. Its occupant was visibly weakened and had difficulty standing. The fishermen brought the raft alongside and assisted Poon aboard their vessel. He was unable to walk without support. His weight had dropped significantly. His skin showed extensive sun damage. Despite this, he was conscious and able to communicate basic information. The raft was left behind. Its contents were no longer relevant. The transition from isolation to contact was brief and without ceremony. The fishermen provided water and simple food in small amounts to avoid shock. Poon was transported to shore and then to a medical facility. Verification followed gradually. Dates were compared. Shipping records were checked. The sinking of the Benlamond was confirmed. The duration of survival, 133 days, was established through cross-referencing testimony and known currents. The distance traveled was later estimated at over 3,700 kilometers. Medical assessment found severe malnutrition and dehydration, but no irreversible organ damage. Recovery was slow but complete. Poon regained weight and mobility over time. His survival exceeded previous records for time adrift alone at sea. There was no immediate public recognition. Wartime conditions limited attention. When the account became known, it was treated as an anomaly rather than a model. The event did not change naval policy directly, but it was documented carefully. Rescue concluded not with resolution, but with removal from the environment that had sustained and threatened life simultaneously. The Atlantic did not mark the transition. It continued its movement, indifferent to how long the raft had been carried or where it had come ashore. Poon survival entered the historical record without spectacle. It did not alter the course of the war or lead to immediate recognition. Its significance lay in duration and method rather than circumstance. One person remained alive at sea for 133 days using equipment never intended for such use. After recovery, Poon returned briefly to maritime work. His experience was later studied by naval authorities and survival experts. Manuals were revised to emphasize rainwater collection, fishing, and the value of improvised tools. The changes were practical, not symbolic. They reflected what had been demonstrated rather than what had been theorized. The event also exposed limits within wartime systems. Ships passed without stopping. Signals were missed or ignored. Survival depended on what could be done alone, without expectation of timely rescue. The ocean offered no feedback, only continued movement. Poon did not frame his experience as extraordinary. He described actions taken because they were necessary: fishing when possible, conserving water, repairing what could not be replaced. The record that remains is procedural rather than dramatic. The raft itself was not preserved. It returned to the sea. What endured was documentation and adjustment, evidence that extended survival could occur through restraint, adaptation, and repetition under severe constraint. The Atlantic remains unchanged. Routes continue to cross it. Rafts still drift when ships are lost. The difference is not in the ocean, but in what is now known to be possible upon it.